Welcome back, everyone. I think we're now ready to begin with our third session, the last session of the day. We will be having the last session under the topic of strengthening capacity building for effective SARPs implementation. This session will be moderated by Director Stephen Patrick Creamer of Air Navigation Bureau of ACAL. So we're going to start the session. Please.
And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before we get started, on behalf of all of us here, I'd just like to thank the hosts in the Korean Ministry of Land and Infrastructure and Transport, the industry partners and sponsors who have been so generous in the hosting so that we could have this conference. Today, it's late, and I know that many of you are struggling to stay with it. So we're going to try and shake things up a little bit and see if we can't tighten our prepared remarks so that we can get into questions and answers with you about the challenges that we're all facing together, and see if we can't provoke and stimulate your imagination. Because what I would suggest to you as the director of the Bureau responsible for supporting the development of standards and recommended practices globally is that we don't yet have the solution for how to deal with the acceleration in change that's about to happen. And so today we're here to explore that and do it in I think, a relatively fun way. And I have three champions for implementation who are going to talk about how it's done in three of the leading regions in the world. And then we're going to explore how we might build on what they're doing today so that we can meet these challenges that we all face together. The good news is we learned some lessons over the course of the last 3 years during the pandemic and the recovery, during the past 20 years as we've all developed safety management together, and frankly over the course of aviation's history as we've all collectively addressed risk together. So, without further ado, I am also going to provide an introductory brief, and then I will introduce each of the speakers in turn after I've done the brief so that we don't waste too much of your time up front. So ICAO standards are one part of a process. ICAO's Universal Safety Oversight Audit Continuous Monitoring Approach Program are another part of a process. But I want to give you the frame of how that all goes together. Our aspirational goal is 0 fatalities in the aviation system, and we're doing a pretty good job of driving towards that goal as an industry. Pre-pandemic in 2019, 4.4 billion passengers moved worldwide with a loss of some lives, but the number of incidents involved was dramatically low. That creates its own challenges for us, but it also provides us with opportunities. The ICAO process starts with a needs validation, looking at whether there's a change that's required to optimize the system. And of course, the system does need to be optimized. So we go through and create global plans to that effect so that we have common definitions and terms of reference. We develop standards, procedures for air navigation service. We work together on implementation planning like these gentlemen do in the regions. And then we go through the audit process to assess and measure the state's capabilities to oversee and regulate the safety that's being imposed in the system as these changes are occurring. And then, of course, compliance validation, verification in the states, and we go back to the same process over again. The Global Aviation Safety Plan has an horizon or about 15 years, but it's focused on a 3-year block of work. So the current block is 2023 to 2025. It now has a set of targets and indicators that should be taken into account in the development of national and regional plans. It has 5 high-risk categories of focus that need to be given constant attention by operators, by the regulators in the member states and in the regions. It does look at the impact of global aviation disruption events on aviation safety. And it looks at migration of implementation support contacts so that it gets easier for people in the field to understand what's in the document. The Global Air Navigation Plan focuses on implementation of air navigation services in the airspace. The difference between the two plans, though, is that they target different users, and they also target different problems. So frequently a SARP related to air navigation will not be mandatory on the date that it's published, but if you encounter a need to tackle growth or efficiency, the way to do it is in accordance with the GAMP and with the standards and procedures that are implemented through the GAMP's processes, because that allows consistency of operation and universality of delivery across different airspaces and with different air navigation service providers. Now, somebody talked to me today about transparent processes for developing rules and standards. And at ICAO, we have a transparent process, which you cannot read on this slide. But the challenge with transparency is you have to know how to line the mirrors up so that you can follow the process at the level that you need for what you're doing in the system. And so that's something we're going to talk about, because while I would say our system is open and available, you have to be something of an expert before I would consider it to be transparent to you. And I think the same is true in many other rulemaking systems. The USOAP CMA has a set of on-site and off-site activities that are conducted in every country or against every country's record in the ICAO system. And we annually go through a process of assessing which states have the potential for risk that needs to be evaluated. And so last year, between on-site audits and off-site validations, we had a total of approximately 40 activities. We looked at 3 state safety program implementations, and we conducted workshops on how to comply with the USOAP process in 4 different places around the world. And we do these workshops annually, at least 3, sometimes 4 times. And then we also do assessments for some of our partners in the UN. The World Food Program now runs an audit program or an assessment program that's very similar to the USOAP on their own operations. Our audit activities very quickly goes through as well full scope audits. We did 5. We have limited scope audits across some of the categories of activity. And then we have focused audits when we need to look at perhaps one area in a particular state that might be called out. ICAO coordinated validation missions you'll probably see less of in the future, because frankly they've outlived their usefulness as a tool, because states that have had a full audit, they have a series of findings, they work on their corrective actions. The ICVM was essentially an opportunity to have ICAO come back and look at just the things you've worked on and to give you a check mark that you've improved your grade. But alongside that, there might be other areas that have not been doing so well that they are not permitted to actually review in that process. And with limited resources in the global system, we simply don't have the latitude to be able to provide as many of those in the current cost structure. They can be provided for a member state through cost recovery if personnel and expertise is available, which is not always the case. And then I've talked about the SSPIAs, the workshops. Now this is an interesting progression. 2019, 4 billion passengers, only a couple of accidents, yet we're seeing an implementation rate that year of 68.5%. So does that mean that we have 33% of our SARPs that we don't need? The answer is no, that's not what that means. But it does mean that we have an ongoing challenge, because there are 193 countries who are implementing SARPs individually and then reporting that back to ICAO. And they're doing that in a way that is, structured and standardized so that it's clear and transparent, and I think reasonably consistent when you go to each of the different states. But it also means that we can't touch all 12,000 SARPs in the audit process. The average levels of effective implementation, the highest level is people getting their legislation in place. That's good. That's good because it means political leaders understand the importance of having that legislation in place. It means they understand that they have to have someone be responsible and accountable for the implementation and delivery of safety oversight. But then the specific regulations need to be established. You have to create your operating systems, hire staff, have the provisions available to be able to do all the guidance for your staff to keep them trained, license and certify your operators, do your surveillance at the level necessary, and that varies depending upon the circumstance. And then the one that we're really challenged by is resolution of safety critical issues. And I'll come back and talk about that as we go through the Q&A later. This is another way of looking at the same data. You'll note that airworthiness of aircraft is an area where most people understand it and the integration occurs reasonably well. Now, the USOAP audit is not easy. Anybody here that's a USOAP coordinator for a state? Several of you. Anybody that's led a team that's responding to an ICAO audit? Anybody? Okay, well, one of you one day will be lucky and get to do that. It's challenging. You're having to respond to audit questions and show that you have met the requirements. And the requirements are constantly changing. So we're retooling the audit process to make that easier for you. Easier to submit your evidence, easier for you to understand the relationships between the questions and the standards, and then also to streamline the process to where it's more automated and you have more visibility into how your state is perceived and where it sits in the system relative to other states. The USOAP Program Continuous Monitoring Manual is your guide. I am not. That is your guide, okay? Because it has all the details about how to go through the process of preparing a state for an audit and to continuously update your materials in the online framework, which is really an important indicator when we're assessing risk. This year, there are 18 audits being conducted globally. We're back to full speed after the pandemic. We have 6 ICBMs, the 3 SSPIAs, and this activity is published in June each year with a forecast of the activities in the following year. So we're forecasting 18 months out to give states more understanding of when they're going to be visited and what the timelines are. And that's important because we use seconded personnel from all over the world to conduct audits. Henry's one of our people who's done these audits, and that requires a lot of coordination to bring those people into the ICAO process and conduct a mission. The reliability of the effective implementation score degrades over time. Some of the largest countries in the world, aviation countries in the world, have not seen an audit in 15 years. So if an audit was conducted in the United States in 2007, is that relevant today? So we want to get more regular in returning to states and doing the audit processes. That means we're probably going to have to scale some to be able to conduct more audits as needed, but it also means that we're going to tap into intelligence and information in ways that we have not been able to in the past so that we have better indicators of where that focus needs to be. And that'll happen all over the world. So the audit process is evolving. Keeping track of how states are doing at implementing standards is evolving. And we produce today about 500 changes in the SARPs and PANs every year. But last year, the president of the ANC talked about it in his keynote. We agreed globally to aim at a target of 0 net carbon emissions by 2050, and we're planning on about a quarter of that progress being made in technology and airspace operations. Another 50% of that progress through the implementation of SAF fuel delivery, and overseeing and managing SAFs on the airport is actually a pretty big deal when you're talking about technical capabilities. So there's a lot of new skill, new procedures, new technology that's going to have to be integrated into our systems in the next 10 years. Because to get to 2050 with that much reduction means you need the standards in the next 10 years so that you can deliver these vehicles in these markets to be successful. We are not that fast at implementing standards globally. It takes us a long time from the time one of you has an idea about how to do something until it's a globally accepted idea around the world. Our goal at ICAO is to find ways to dramatically accelerate the rate within which change can occur. But for that to happen, it means the member states, the regulators in the states, actually have to be on the forefront of managing and implementing that change. And artificial intelligence is not going to be your driver. A person, hopefully utilizing artificial intelligence, will be. An interesting anecdote that I was told, and I really believe in, is that a human being scanning a scan for a cancer is about 95% accurate at looking at that scan. Artificial intelligence, looking at the same scan, 90 to 93% accurate. Not quite as good as the human, but pretty good. Put the human with artificial intelligence, 99 and a half. So our trick is going to be finding ways to harness the information that we have available in ways that's different from what we do today, and lifting the best ideas off the tables that you're all sitting at and bringing them into the global conversation and adopting them faster. Anybody in this room that's under 30 years old? I hope there's one or two. See, we're in trouble. Anyone here under 30? One. Okay. The whole load is on you, sir. I apologize. You're going to have to do it all. But there are a lot of good people in the room here that want to take advantage of your skill with automation and technology and the thinking that comes with it. At ICAO, we're going through a transformational objective that's going to last for 3 years to essentially digitize the process of moving information in the ICAO world. Now, in this first 3 years, we're focused internally and then in interactions with the member states. But I would suspect in the ensuing 3 years, that's going to spread and become much more real to you in the field and in the member states. So I look for what this is doing. Don't be afraid to give us feedback and help us in this journey. And if you can recruit some of your other friends that are 20 and under to 30 and under to give us that insight into what we're getting right or what we're missing, that's going to be hugely beneficial to the ICAO system. Ladies and gentlemen, flying is not safe. Flying is full of risk. But the reason we're all comfortable flying is because we're really good at identifying and understanding that risk and then solving for it, controlling it. We're going to get better at doing that faster so that this aspirational goal is maintained alongside the zero emissions goal. And while we're doing both those goals, we're going to double the size of the system because you're going to put your ingenuity into that change. So it's my pleasure to kick this off with this challenge. And then I have 3 gentlemen here who are going to talk to you about how change is done today in the regions. And then what we're going to do after we have their talks is we're going to get into Q&A. And if you're not writing down questions while they talk, I'm going to be really upset. Okay? I want to see questions because I want to see all of us getting involved. It's 4:10 on Thursday afternoon. You're way into a deck of presentations. We want to hear you as well as you hear us. So next up, I have to get the right page up here. Mr. Henry O'Ketch is a seasoned, experienced, and self-driven, highly motivated civil servant with the African Civil Aviation Commission based in Dakar, Senegal. He has over 23 years of experience related to aircraft maintenance engineering and safety, and he is responsible today for the Africa Region CIS Technical Assistance Program for the 54 African member states. Capacity building programs, and the AFCAC expert working groups. His previous experience includes serving in the East Africa Community's Regional Safety and Security Oversight Agency, COSOA, as the manager for airworthiness. and also as the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority's Senior Airworthiness Inspector, Base Maintenance Manager for the Mission Aviation Fellowship International Regional Approved Maintenance Organizations based in Kenya. He has a deep experience in ICAO work with USOP CMA auditor background and airworthiness. He has a master's degree, bachelor's degree, and a lifetime of experience on top of that. Henry, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Director, the moderator. And once again, may I join my colleagues in extending appreciation to the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport for the kind invitation that saw us come to this very beautiful city and land of Korea. As stated, I'm presenting on strengthening SARPs implementation cooperation among the African countries. I come from a background whereby collaboration, cooperation, and communication has been the basis for operations. And at AFCAC, you can't talk about African civil aviation cooperation among states without mentioning AFCAC. And it's on the basis of that that I believe your understanding of who AFCAC is will go a long way in helping us see how we are working together in Africa to ensure that we strengthen the implementation of the standards and recommended practices. AFCAC is a specialized agency of the African Union. It was established way back in 1969. And in 1978, it was handed over to the then Organization of African Unity, which is now the AU. And all the way, it had been supported by ICAO, both financially and administratively, until the year 2007, when we had our own autonomy. The mandate is enshrined in the AFCAC Constitution, which spells out our mandate. And looking at the theme of our discussion, the mandate of AFCAC squarely lies in there, including coordination of civil aviation matters in Africa and cooperate with the ICAO and all other relevant organizations and bodies which are involved in the promotion and development of civil aviation in Africa. At the same time, we're involved in fostering, encouraging, and supporting the implementation of ICAO SARPs for safety, security, and environmental protection. We encourage and support the creation of autonomous civil aviation authorities, which has gone a long way in enhancing the implementation of SARPs in the recent times. We also foster and coordinate programs for the development of training facilities in Africa and encourage also supporting the training and development of personnel in all fields of civil aviation. And I'm glad to say that as we do that, we've been partnering with various stakeholders, including the Republic of Korea. Most recently, we did airport pavement evaluation. We're also planning for aerodrome safety in Mauritania, and I think we're in the right place to discuss collaboration in this endeavor. We are responsible for 54 African member states, and that gives us a very enormous task which we cannot accomplish on our own without collaboration. We are based in Dakar, Senegal, just in case you didn't know. And of course, we have a vision, just like many other organizations, well aligned to our mandate, as mentioned in my previous statement. We also have core values which we embrace as we serve our stakeholders, good governance, best practices, and that allows us to continue collaborating with many other stakeholders, transparency and accountability, as mentioned by the director, professionalism and integrity, safe and just culture. Now, having understood who AFCAC is, serving the 54 African member states, and this was very well and ably demonstrated during the 41st ICAO Assembly, where we were able to marshal support, including support from stakeholders like you who are sitting here, to get our members onto the ICAO Council. That couldn't have happened without the coordinated approach. Now, our member states have improved. You may look at the figures and think that we are doing very badly, but over time we have improved. Way back, our CAs were not autonomous. Most of the states did not have established regulatory framework, but at least we are moving steadily. However, similar to the presentation made by the director of the Air Navigation Bureau, critical element number 4 remains a challenge. And that affects the other implementation critical elements like CE7 and CE8. Our average EI on the continent is 57.8%. So we are still a long way to go. We haven't even attained the previous 60% target, and now it has moved ahead to 75. And of course, the various critical elements are indicated as shown below. Now, we know very well that we have some work to do, and that has opened our eyes and enhanced our approach to how we resolve these issues. Because out of the audits, the use of CMA audits, we've had cases whereby some of our states got SSCs or SSEC, and because of the concerted effort, we resolved them. How did we do this? We did this by pooling resources. We realized that personnel are a challenge, and I believe globally it remains so. So we looked around, identifying qualified and trained personnel, and brought them in a pool of experts known as the AFSSCO program. This is the African Indian Ocean Cooperative Inspectorate Scheme for Safety. And then we also have the African AFI Cooperative Expert Scheme of Aviation Security. So that's the difference, AFSSCO and AFSSCO. Now we do this for the whole purpose of marshalling these resources to support states and resolve the SSCs that may have been identified. We also marshal resources to support states in the development and implementation of the corrective action plans. And reactively, sometimes, we also support states to prepare for use of CMA audits, although that's not our primary objective. We'd want our states to be in a situation whereby any time the audit is mentioned or the ICVM comes, they are ready to go. So this is something that over time has supported the continent, and we believe with your collaboration, actually we are collaborating with EASA, we are collaborating with AFDB, Boeing has also come on board, and many other stakeholders to support that program. Now, for us to address the issues of capacity building, we are working with international partners, as mentioned earlier. And right now, we normally train over 500 experts annually in various fields, in various domains. The other thing that we have also done is to come together under the umbrella of the Ministerial Council to identify the challenges and target them with homemade solutions. And this has been well captured in the Abuja Safety and Air Navigation Targets, which are constantly monitored, reviewed as appropriate to align with the GASP and the GAMP, so that our states can also rise in the status of implementation of the SARPs. We also have another initiative that we've come up with, and this is establishing expert working groups. This is very recent. We launched it on the 28th of February this year. We have 16 domains. All the safety areas are covered, airworthiness, PEL, ANS, AGA, all the way to environmental protection, aviation security and facilitation, including the administrative and financial areas, so that we use the resources that we have within the continent to champion the areas that we need, some of them being the training needs analysis. We realize that sometimes courses are offered, but are they the ones we truly need as a continent? So we are getting to a point whereby the experts in each of the domains are analyzing the needs, and then they inform us so that as we discuss with the international partners, they can customize those courses. And I'm glad to mention that one of the professors I'll be meeting tomorrow already has packaged something based on the training needs that we shared. Thank you very much, ROK, for that. And the other thing that we are also doing is For a long time, Africa has not been part of the process for the proposals of amending ICAO annexes. We become reactive. When they become effective, that's when we start running up and down. They're a bit expensive to implement, they're impossible. So right now we have focused our attention to be part of the process. From the initial stages to work through the process, advise our states accordingly, and also register any reservations that we may be having at the right time. So we believe this will also transform the implementation of the SARPs. We all agree that the amendment process of SARPs is becoming more frequent compared to what it used to be. So this needs a very predictive, proactive way so that we are not left behind. So ladies and gentlemen, this is what we do in the continent. We work very closely with the regional safety oversight organizations. We never used to have many, but at least now we are having a good number. More recently, we had now a fully fledged latest RSO on the continent, which is SASO. It used to be IFSSCO. Right now, it is SASO. That is a great achievement for the continent, and we believe that that collaboration will go a long way in supporting the implementation of SARPs. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Over to you, moderator.
Thank you, Henry. I really appreciate that, that overview of the situation in Africa. And we're going to talk more about some of the collective efforts that are going on there. And actually, before we do that, though, we're going to move and talk about the collective efforts in South America. Mr. Fabio Rabbani is the Regional Director for ICAO in the South American office in Lima. He's currently responsible for building capacity of the South American countries to comply with ICAO's provisions and to develop their aviation system as a means for socioeconomic progress. He served as head of the Airport Infrastructure Department of the Brazilian Civil Aviation Agency and as a chief advisor to the board of directors. Previously, he was the Airport Management Director at the Secretariat of Civil Aviation of the Presidency of the Republic of Brazil. He's held a position of Facilitation Technical Manager at ANAC and served as a manager in the Ministry of Defense's Civil Aviation Bureau. He's performed in leadership positions to develop and promote integrated transportation planning and road safety projects in Brazil. Mr. Rabbani has an MSc degree in aeronautics in the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and a civil engineering degree at the Federal University of Paraíba. And he's also my friend. Fabio, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the kind words, my friend. Good afternoon, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. I could not thank again the Ministry of Land Infrastructure and Transport here in Korea for welcoming us, for allowing us to be here, and actually having the opportunity to meeting all of you and seeing this beautiful country. I'll try to be brief, but bear in mind that we'll have the opportunity to share a little bit of our thoughts throughout the question. So I hope I can be as swift as possible. And the idea here is actually to complement on the talks that we already heard, bringing to the table here the thoughts on exactly how implementation support can be achieved through enablers that can benefit not only aviation safety, but actually providing elements for social and economic development. And I'm not going to go into that detail. I'm going to focus on safety. But we have been guilty throughout the years of not focusing many times on how aviation supports society overall. And I believe we could make the same mistake when we talk about implementation and not saying how implementation actually supports safety. And this is something that over the years, I think part of the response of what Steve mentioned here on the audit program, where we're trying to focus in reviewing and seeing if there was a sustainable management system that ensured that the numbers on the last audit program actually correspond to the reality, is something that we have seen in many countries. And in South America has not been different. You know, the problems that we know and are aware, and they go beyond just these elements that we see in this screen. You know, talking about personnel, procedures, how we ensure that the operators and the aviation system is actually complying with the expected performance. we're actually talking about the capacity and the governance of our regulators. How you ensure sustainability, how you ensure that your regulations are up to date, working with performance, that the process, the transparent process that also any national regulation goes through, avoids undue influence, ensures that you have a technical independence in that process. And they're reasonable. They're up to date and they're reasonable to be implemented throughout the system. These are challenges that we see all the time. And yes, implementation is something that ensures and strengthening that implementation of international standards has been something that have supported these elements over the years. But we need to be very aware of that. You know, naturally, having a high level of implementation is a great benefit. You really look good. But you actually are improving safety management. If you look at the elements that we have in the state safety program, which is an ICAO provision, they match perfectly with the best practices of governance of regulators that you see issued by OECD, you know, the Organization for Cooperation and Economic Development. And this is something that we should bear in mind, and we have seen that regulators and states that have complied with a strong safety management, they expanded those capacities to other areas that they work on, and they actually established good governance. And that reflects not only to the state, it reflects to the industry overall, and beyond their own borders. And this is something that we have seen, and I want to share with you a little bit our experience here in the region. Well, what have been the enablers that we have taken advantage within our region in South America? South America comprises of 13 states. We cover 16% of the FIR area of the world. And aviation contributes between 4 to 10% of the GDP of our countries. This by itself should be a good support for aviation, but we are always trying to remind everyone of the benefits that aviation generates. How we have been working inside the region has allowed us to actually build a good framework. I wouldn't say perfect, we're still working on that, but a good framework that has supported us to evolve in the implementation of the international provisions. And we have worked on a good governance model through collaboration, using more and more data-driven to support decision, and actually building up from harmonization of the regulations among the states that are part of the region. Talking about collaboration, I won't go through the detail here, but I want to share with you that we have many regional groups and regional mechanisms that support safety. And what we have done is take advantage of the ICAO's role within the region, either secretariating or coordinating the activities, together with our regular program, which is the direct assistance that we provide as a regional office, to ensure that we address from policy making, planning, data management, until specific safety implementation projects that affect operations overall. Needless to say, to have a good governance, you have to have targets and indicators that show that you're reaching those targets, and actually we meet with the GASP under our regional plan. Working on data-driven decision, we not only use data, hard data, but we are actually working within our assistant processes to feed the information that we need to make and see the same picture among all the stakeholders, ensuring that we are seeing the same situation and supporting that we can have consensus on the priorities that we have in the region. This is one example where we have remote assistance activities focused on improving the level of compliance after audit programs that have fed us also in that decision-making process. I'll skim through this. I think you have the slides, but that's just an improvement process that we have recently implemented that goes to the highest level of the civil aviation authorities to ensure that all the assistance actually reflects in actions made by the states. And through this process, we believe that we will engage them and actually respond to the more comprehensive and full audits that are about to come in our region through the ICAO program. I believe you had a very good presentation on turbulence that I missed, but I'll watch the recording later on. But I just wanted to share that this is a good example of industry and state collaboration that we have in our regional safety group. Throughout the years, we were identifying, say, well, we don't have any improvements on the numbers on turbulence. But actually, the severity was indicating that some specific areas and some specific operators were having recurrent situations that demanded some kind of action. We still don't have an evolved solution, as we saw this morning, but for sure, that collaborative work has provided some elements for the operators to improve their operations. Regarding harmonization, which will be the last point I'll address now, and this is something maybe that's the most peculiar situation that we have in our region, and that contemplates to have a regional technical cooperation project that actually, I would say, mimics very closely to a regional safety oversight organization. It's aimed to something like EASA, may be different from a cost cap that many of you might know because it goes beyond that, but actually uses harmonized regulation sets to be a backbone for a series of activities that we can do within the region. I'll just mention quickly, it's referred to Latin American regulations, so you'll see only Spanish or English, or Portuguese, excuse me, Portuguese-speaking countries involved in that at this moment. So we have 12 of our countries involved and participant of this mechanism, supported by the industry as well. And they allow us to having these backbone regulations. They have allowed us to have multinational certification activities, training based on those regulations, providing assistance and holding many technical meetings using those references and allowing our states to take advantage of the economies of scale of a mechanism that has stimulated improvements in their regulations and also allowed us to receive feedback on the operations and allowing us to review some of those regional regulations to improve them throughout the process. I won't go into detail. We have now 47 Latin American regulations, all compliant to ICAO standards. We take advantage of those elements, especially on critical elements 2, 4, 5, 6, have been directly affected by the performance in our region. And naturally, we have seen the numbers and our average today in effective implementation and compliance to international standards on average above 82%. These states even have a little bit higher compliance than only the South American countries, which is about 79%. And just as a last comment, as I was saying, that the benefits go beyond mere compliance, within this method, this line of work, we also have been able to work on processes such as certification of maintenance organizations within our region. Today we have 5, actually we have 4 another ones going through the certification this year. It has expanded a lot, and the benefits are in the numbers that we have seen. Specifically, for example, for a maintenance organization that goes through a certification process and oversight throughout every 2 years, the benefits have been seen in a reduction up to 89% of their costs. And for our states, just for the regulation development, training, multinational activities, and assistance to them, the 2 cost-benefit analyses were made in 2 periods of 7 and 8 years, and we're going to do another one. This is kind of outdated because we don't contemplate 8 years. We already have been identifying a saving of $35 million for those 12 states. I'll stop here, and we'll be open for questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Fabio. We definitely are going to have some follow-up questions on a few of those items, I know, because I know you all remember you have to have at least 1 question, each of you, for Fabio, and 1 question for Henry. And now it's time for us to have our last speaker, once I get the screen up here, so that I can introduce Mr. Javier Vicedo. Javier is the representative for the European Union Aviation Safety Agency for China and North Asia. From this position, he supports bilateral negotiations and promotes regulatory exchange between EASA and aviation stakeholders across multiple domains of competency within the region. Throughout his career in the aviation industry, he has worked in Europe, North America, and Asia, holding a wide range of positions spanning from research and technology to business development across multiple sectors in the aerospace industry, including satellite equipment, military systems, and commercial aircraft. Previous to his work at EASA, he worked at a major European aerospace corporation in China. Concurrently, he was the chairman of the Aviation and Aerospace Working Group of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China, a position from which he was able to support EU policy and assisted in the setting up of the Aviation Partnership Project between EASA and the CAAC of China. Further to this experience, he recently supported to expand the project to other Asian countries. Javier holds a PhD in engineering from Cambridge University, speaks Chinese, as well as several European languages. Javier, the floor is yours. Welcome.
I can't quite get used to that photo. That was long time ago. Hello, everybody. I'm very, very pleased to be here. It's been a whole week, and I take with me great memories. I'd like to thank MOLIT and all of those and ICAO for making such a fabulous week. I'd like to start my presentation perhaps to remind or to inform all of you that this year we are celebrating 20 years of the establishment of EASA. And it's sort of also 20 years since I left Europe. And while I'm not going to make this about me, I will say one thing for those of you that left your country. There is a certain thing when one leaves the country, which is, it took me some time to realize, and is anonymity. Doesn't matter the country you go to, if you don't live in your country, you feel you can just ignore what's going around you. And when the decisions are made, when the opinions are done, then you may express your opinion. And you will see why I say this. As a Spanish person that I am, I'll tell you an anecdote. Several years ago, we nominated a Spanish football coach, and he was asked, what are you gonna do? How are you gonna manage? He said, well, I just carry the title. There's 40 million football coaches in this country. So that's Europe for you. We have 500 million people, and now I'm discovering, after coming back, they all have opinions. And I say this because, like I mentioned a couple of days ago, when I see all of you that work, especially those of you that work at ICAO in Montreal, I feel very blessed. And it's not that I feel blessed that we work in a high-tech industry. I think here's where what we were discussing earlier, there's young professionals and the YouTubes and the TikToks, and we should attract them this way. I just don't see that actually the way. I think this is an industry that prides itself in listening to others. We always express our opinions. We always sit, competitors included. You have Boeing and Airbus sitting together. You also have Korean Air and Asiana sitting together to tackle one thing. And you always gonna listen what the other one has with respect, because he may actually help you avoid something big happening. So I think something to take with a lot of pride, and which leads me to my presentation. So this, I stole this from Nicolas Rallo, our representative for ICAO in the region, just to give you a snapshot. His last visit, he presented the objectives over there. This is EASA. This is a PDF version. Is there a possibility you could put the PPT version instead? Well, I'll keep going, and if they change it. So this is EASA for you, 20 years celebration we are. So we are about 800 people. 20 years ago, 28 states at the time got together, and they gave us a mandate. And I say this because including in the mandate, it also said, we'll trust you with regulations, and we trust you also with following international ICAO SARPs as well. So there is this very interesting relationship whereby whatever is discussed in Montreal, we need to make sure we also take it on because our states are looking at us for doing it. Another very important aspect, and I go back to the opinion I was talking earlier before, is we have in our organization by mandate or by duty, we have 2 advisory bodies, and they're very open. We have on the one hand, we have the member state advisory body, and even if you see 5 blocks here, it's more like 30 or 40 people that come to every meeting. They will discuss with us their opinions, we will share what we think, they will give us advice, they will have disagreements, and this will happen regularly. And if on the right side, we also have our advisory, stakeholder advisory body, which in a nutshell, you could call it the industry advisory body, where again, it's not 12 people, it's probably also in the order of 40 to 50 representatives that will come and join. This means that everything we do, we have to be transparent and we have to be listening. If I invite you to EASA, and if you come, I dare you to find a day in which there's not a meeting going on with externals talking about how to implement regulations of international magnitude. And this is key. I really had a great animation. I love to play with PowerPoint. I had a great animation for this slide, so I apologize we couldn't put the PPT. But look, in a sum, this is the way, this is my last slide. This is the way we implement SARPs in our regulation. So on the top left side, you have processes that most of you are familiar with. So state letter 1, state letter 2, in which the first are all the panels that many of you are participants to. Our member states are too, in which discussions take place already. By the time a proposal is issued, states will rely on us to conduct, often together with them, an assessment of how that proposal may impact some of the regulations. We'll do an impact assessment of which regulations are going to be affected and where the type of efforts that may be required. We also will work with them for a response letter that will be shared and then transmitted to ICAO as well. And upon adoption, the real work starts. Well, that wouldn't be fair, but the more deeper work will start. Of course, we will advise states to report of any differences, and then we will input our work in what we call the European Plan for Aviation Safety. Now, this is a public document and contains all the work that we kind of carry out throughout the year. You can access it. I've presented it as well in our latest 2018, back here in Busan, I think it was, and I remember presenting the outline of it back then, that one. And it contains all the efforts that we do, including those that are related to SARPs. The first step amongst all this process will be to set up a rulemaking group. So we now have the rulemaking task in the EPAS, so therefore we have promised all member states and all stakeholders that we are going to develop a rule based on SARPs. So we will create terms of reference in a rulemaking group. This rulemaking group is not only people of EASA or even colleagues from member states, may also carry in industry as well. Then this group will work and produce, here on the right side, sometime after, a notice for proposed amendment. They'll be public. It's public for comment, and it can be commented by any of you in this room as well. We'll receive all opinions, questions. Why aren't we doing this? Why are we using 2,000 kilos? Why is not 2,300? Why is 6 passengers? Why not 23? This notice amendment is public, and it has opened for a long consultation. Given the time that it goes by, we will change that rulemaking group very likely and incorporate new members. And we'll have a review group that will work throughout quite some extensive time to prepare questions and, to prepare answers, which is the document that you see on the left, but also to draft what will be our final opinion, the final regulation. We call them opinions. Following that, there'll be an implementing regulation, and then concurrently, pretty much, EASA will issue a decision. As you can see, the process is, I wanted to introduce more the process than how we are structured internally, to give you a reference of how it works. It's very transparent. It would appear that not for everybody, but it truly is. Maybe we're just too Europe-centric sometimes. But it's very transparent towards the stakeholders and all these meetings, and allows for all these considerations to be accounted for. And that'll be the wrap-up of my presentation. Again, I'd like to thank all of you, and I look forward to a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. So I think I was the major violator of the time rule on this panel. So on that regard, I want to thank all of you for the brevity, and I don't blame you if you slip in some new remarks or ideas as you're going through the rest of the conversation. Now, I believe we have a way for you to be able to present questions to us, and we have some roving microphones, and we'll see if we can't engage you in the audience, because actually we're interested in your feedback for some of these ideas. But the lead-off question I'd like to ask our three panelists, and maybe I'll start with you, Javier, because you just finished, and you gave us the fairly detailed look at what the European system works like. So with the challenges that I just talked about, and the experience that we've just had with the pandemic, and recognizing that our regulatory mandate was perhaps not independent of others, is the process you've got fast enough, and is it inclusive enough for this future with disruptive change?
So, full disclosure, we did not prepare any questions whatsoever, so know that. But it's fun. The question is, I don't know. I mean, hold on. Is the process fast enough? I think we can all agree that the faster these things go, the better. Once we know what the answer is. So to be clear, that's why we like this consultation, in case we've missed something. I think it's extremely important to give some time as well for that. We should not precipitate ourselves. Now, from the pandemic, I worry, the actual process of, I think what the pandemic really highlighted to us, a bit my director also mentioned earlier, is this idea that we are so international, and so that we feel comfortable with the processes. But as soon as we have to interact with non-aviation stakeholders, we realize that they're all very, very national and domestic. And I remember joining the ACC RPG in ICAO APAC, this team organized to handle the recovery. And at the end, meeting after meeting, somebody will come up and say, well, you know, it's not me. Like, I'm under the... It took time, because we are proud people. We are proud. It's a cool industry, so we are proud. But at the end of the day, we all disclose, like, look, we are at the mercy of a bigger authority here that is telling me that I just fall. So I worry more about those. I worry, we were talking earlier about cybersecurity, AI, all this stuff that is that is a bit side and it's coming in. Even sustainability, actually. We are convinced we have a plan. We really do. You mentioned earlier. But maybe one state comes and tells them, no, whoa, you can't do that, CAA, because I think that your feedstock is kind of used for something else. Well, what happens then? So this is the part I worry more about. Could we be fast if we have somebody that doesn't yet understand they need to talk to the other guy? I mean, the health authorities took their time to talk to other health authorities, which didn't take us a bit, like it was immediate.
Okay, thank you. Just something for us to ponder, because the method we use to coordinate and to come to decisions is something that I think is challenging for us when we get more and more players in a multinational, multilateral environment. And my experience is that frequently the decisions that we make are sometimes the enemy of the best, and they're what's acceptable to to the majority, but perhaps that's not the choice that we would make if we were independently developing something. So it's just it's an aspect of the way we develop that's always going to be challenging and we have to tackle in our process. Let's open to the floor and see if anybody has a question they'd like to raise towards any of our panelists. Oh, you're so shy. I'm going to ask more grueling questions if you don't. That's not fair. Okay. Henry, I guess I have to ask you a tough question then. In the last couple of years, you've had remarkable success in Africa with, I think, the delivery of a safe environment, safety output in the system. And we talked in the prep about the history of getting to where you're at today. What was the toughest part of moving from the 2000-2005 timeframe when we had some of the challenges in defining the path and where you are today?
Thank you very much for that question. If I reflect what happened way back in 2005 and earlier to where we are right now, there are a couple of things I could mention. To begin with, at that time, most of the regulatory entities used to be directorates within the Ministry of Transport. So they did not have the autonomy, they did not have the financial muscle. They were dependent on the national budget. And that limited even the attraction of competent personnel. So we'd find very few people who've been there in the civil service and maybe in the comfort of being permanently and employed with pension. They tried to do what was impossible because a growing industry basically needs a vibrant workforce. So that in itself was a limitation. And you find that at that time, it was very difficult for us to get on board many of the things, including the constant review or development of the regulations, and the development of technical guidance material, and the actual oversight activities. Because with a few staff, inspections, audit, surveillance, all that were actually at stake. Secondly, because of the inadequacy in the regulatory framework, you find that the number of findings and associated significant concerns at some point were very high. And that's why the Ministerial Council at that time in 2012 decided to establish what we now famously know as the Abuja Safety and then Navigation Targets, just to try and address those issues. And one of the targets was to reduce the number of SSCs that were happening at that time. So the other thing I would also want to mention is from your presentation, even the use of CMA or the assessment criteria has also evolved. It's not what it used to be at that time. Right now, I think it's better because states already know, they are familiar with how the use of CMA audits are conducted or the ICVM and all that. They are a bit used to developing corrective action plans and even implementing. And most importantly, they know where to run to. In 2012, for instance, we did not even have the IFSSCO inspectors. So you can imagine what it was in 2005. But over time, we started building capacity in that area. And we began with 3 areas, 3 domains: operations, airworthiness, and personnel licensing. So what happened to AGA? What happened to ANS? What happened to AIG? So with time, we brought in AGA, we brought in ANS, and most recently, we've also now built capacity for SSP, SMS, AIG, and special emphasis on dangerous goods, among others. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask you a follow-up. Can you tell us a little bit about how the AFI-CIS process works for the sharing of these inspectors?
Thank you. The AFI-CIS process is a process that is well established and through the instruments of governance of AFCAC. We have the plenary where the 54 member states meet, and then we have the bureau, the governing body, and of course the secretariat. So once endorsed by the plenary, the secretariat implements that. And the implementation process is to develop a selection criteria in coordination with the regional offices. And then we write to states to nominate qualified inspectors based on that criteria. Then we go through a selection process with the regional offices. Once the selection is done on the best that we can find and for the capacity that we need, then we provide induction training to explain to them the policies and the procedures, what is expected of them whenever they visit states, just like the use of CMA auditing. Whenever seconded experts are adopted by ICAO, the process they go through to align themselves with the expectations of ICAO during the audits. The same happens. We inform them when they're visiting states, they're representing AFCAC. They should go there knowing that they're ambassadors of a wider entity than themselves. So once that is done, we also avail opportunities for the on-the-job training with experienced inspectors, so that when they go there, they're also familiarized with experiences. For instance, most of the time you find that either they would meet maybe the minister responsible for civil aviation, and in some cases, even the head of state. So they also need to be aligned to the diplomatic expectations so that they know how to behave. It's very different when they visit operators in the industry. And also, when they go there, we inform them they're supporting the state. They don't take responsibility. The state has not delegated their safety oversight responsibilities to them. They're simply supporting them, and where we find gaps, we recommend the state either to hire and maybe train the people they get on board, so that at no point the FCA inspectors take responsibility that is ordinarily the states. And the other important thing to note is we work very closely with the regional offices. We get reports from them. During the roast mission, they feed us, so we get to know what is happening. And also, during the entry debrief, occasionally we also get them so that they are part of what is happening. And the development of the action plan for the state is also done in collaboration with the regional officers. So by the time we go there, there's collaboration at all levels. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm hearing a lot of coordination amongst senior leaders to enable and support the activity and the capacity building that you're doing down below. Okay, thanks.
And maybe the final thing I would want to mention is we also get support. And because of the presence of EASA, currently we have the EU-ASA project, which is actually heavily funding the AFCIS, and we cannot take that for granted. We also have the African Development Bank, and as mentioned recently, Boeing has also expressed interest because they can see result out of what we are doing. So we believe, in case any stakeholder is here and you are willing to partner with us, we have a great opportunity. We have states that still need your support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Looking at the floor, any questions? I've got a question right here. All right. We need a microphone up front, please.
Thank you, Stefan. Maxime Tima from Albania. I have a question for Javier. How does EASA involve in the rulemaking process those countries which are not EU member, but they have a special arrangement with the European Commission, like an ECA agreement, considering that the airspace controlled by those states are served to European passengers, and considering the fact that EASA is considering for the European safety airspace, or whatever the slogan is. Thank you.
If I understand, your question is how do we involve states that are not EASA, not EU members? Okay, so you see the advisory bodies that I mentioned on the left side in my slide? There was a part there that was third countries. Yeah. Sorry. So I don't know the list, but there's third countries there, most in the periphery of Europe. I forgot which ones are there. So, but there are several there. That's one mechanism. Then there is ECAC, coordination with the ECAC as well. Now, when it comes to the actual rulemaking, that's a good question. Are they part? Do we involve them as part of the actual working groups there? That I'm not sure. In the consultations of these bodies, I'm certain that several are. I'll need to remember which ones. But in the actual rulemaking teams that I mentioned earlier, I would imagine that is not the case. But yeah.
So I'm saying that because based on the presentation that Javier shared with us, it was within a process that the states communicate through the process, rulemaking process, the difference with ICAO. And in fact, Albania, a country that I'm representing, since 2006, has been signed an ACA agreement. And as far as we have not been part of any rulemaking process, including the filing FODs, the organization when I joined 2 years ago has no clue about that. So the idea they had, it was just follow European Commission, do implementation as much as you can, and then it'll be good with ICAO. But in fact, we have a different reality. So in the process itself, we need to understand, to learn from our mistakes, from other mistakes, how to do better. And this is the message I want to give to that question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank
So if there's a specific issue, maybe I can ask you guys to take that off. But you know what? You raise a really important point, because one of the problems we have at ICAO is when we send out state letters with changes to the 193 member states, we're lucky if we get back 60, 70 replies, and 26 of them are from Europe. Okay, so we're actually looking for how can we get a higher level of state engagement, because we essentially take that poor coordinator at the international desk in each country and we bury them in state letters, and they don't know what's important. They don't know who it should go to get the comment back. And the states we get the most comments from generally have a member on the panel that produced the material, and they go looking for the letter so that they can write their own comment to get the change in that they didn't quite get through the panel process. I mean, it's really an interesting dynamic. But honestly, that question is a really good question, because if we want to go faster, there's got to be more visibility. There's got to be more awareness of what's most important. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. Any other questions? Well, I'm going to watch, and I'm going to ask Fabio a hard question next, and then I'm going to go. Fabio, you want to follow up?
So this is a dead bat. Oh, how about that bat over here? No, I just wanted to compliment, going back to your first question, and actually you already addressed on the time. I mean, are we fast enough? Time is just, is one dimension of this. The second one is the process itself, how you engage with the stakeholders to ensure that there's understanding of the need, and then how you're going to actually implement. And the last dimension, or one possible dimension, is really applicability and ultimately the implementation. So being fast enough for the standard itself in response, for example, emerging technologies, doesn't necessarily mean, as you just said and we heard here, that we will impact safety, right? Because this is part of the challenge. And we've seen, and probably, and this is not something I came up with, Javier was mentioning, there's a lot of coordination in this process, 26 responses that probably were discussed even during the discussions and elaboration. And this is something that we feel that we could contribute more in developing countries. How we can anticipate, collaborate, and make a better assessment of the impact on the new standards, and actually being able to also assess the need of immediately or not implementing them, and how ICAO could assess also if the non-implementation necessarily means at that moment a safety hazard or not. So these are points that just bring a thought.
So that's a great point. It leads to the question I was going to ask you. So you have worked really hard on developing data, in understanding of the information, and then deciding what data you need to fill out information dashboards. How do you decide what you think is a relevant indicator, and then how do you get consensus amongst the members of the SRVSOP or other groups that that is the right reflection of the situation?
I'll respond that thinking about the SRVSOP, which is a mini RSOO that we have, but also thinking in the whole context, because those other groups and mechanisms that we have work together in trying to make decisions. A lot of the SRV-SOP activities today are responsive to the implementation of new standards that have been placed by ICAO. So a lot more reactive, okay? Using the data allows you to take one step further and maybe anticipating. And we have been focusing that a lot on safety implementation projects, including those that are related to standards that have been in place. They have been gaps, and we not necessarily have seen safety events related to them. But once we started identifying safety events, we go back to see if there's a gap on that state or the states in implementing standards that are already in the regulations. And if there are no gaps there, we go back to assessing if actually the regional reference regulations are addressing those points, and the guidance material and the work has been done actually has contemplated. We had a few situations like this where the state has implemented that was fully harmonized with the regional regulations, but we went back and we saw that there were improvements to be made on the regional regulations, and then derived on guidance, inspector manuals, all the documents, and the training that we were doing. But I'll tell you that not only on SRV-SOP, but especially on ROS-PA, which is our regional safety group, looking at the data, and this is important because we make data available and people are not looking at it. So when I say making data available, is to assure that at least we have the same information before we start discussing. And this has been a cultural change that we have been pushing, because we made dashboards available not only for the regional group, but for the industry. They provide us with their inputs. We want to see the same picture before we start discussing if there's a priority or not. And this has been a gradual change, and I think we have been successful in some cases, but really, if you start discussing without all the elements in place, there has been hard times in actually agreeing on priorities. I don't know if I responded to your question, though.
You did. Thank you. Well done.
That's a friend responding to me.
Okay. So, okay, now I got a hand up. Everybody wants to get in on the action here now.
Stephen, thank you very much. My name is Kahan from Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore. I know that as ICAO, it's usually very tough to balance between no country left behind and versus the question you just asked is, are we doing rule change fast enough? And I look at the international aviation system in the 3-gear system, the low, medium, and high shift, because you have developing country, underdeveloped country, as well as developed country. The question is ICAO structurally and procedurally set up to handle this 3-gear shift? Or are we cater more to the high-end one, but forgotten the low-end one? So just a reflection, and I don't know what the panel will say.
I'll let you answer the question in depth because you're working with ICAO. But one thing, thanks for that question, Kahan. One thing I take from the 2 times the Secretary General spoke is a big concern on the gaps, how to close those gaps, and perhaps worrying that going too fast, and then there is a problem of some of us being left really, really behind, and how does that work? So I second, more than answering the question, I second it.
Okay, so let me tell you that ICAO is a magical organization, because when we adopt a new standard, you're all magically compliant on the date of applicability unless you file a difference. Does that give you comfort, knowing that 2/3 of the states didn't send in the response to the state letter? So the answer is, we're not very good at it, but I think we're getting better, and we're starting to think about how we can perhaps change the relationship between the member states and ICAO on their tracking of progress. So that's one of the reasons Fabio's question about data is really important, because we need a way for states to be able to feed in and say, I'm a developing state, I don't have that kind of activity, I don't actually have a need to implement, and so I'm not going to, okay? Another state might be in a tier where they should implement it, but they maybe don't have the expertise. And they want to be able to identify that without necessarily being called out as being insufficient. And then you've got states that are implementing and doing their own thing. And frequently the states that file the difference are the big states, the ones that say, you know what, ICAO is just not going to tell me how to do this. I've already got an idea. Or we've already done so much internal coordination, we've got a method that's going to be different. And the most famous example I can give you for that is the United States, the state I'm somewhat familiar with, and line up and wait. The United States was 15 years to change one sentence of phraseology. That's pretty remarkable, honestly. I had someone in the system tell me, over my dead body, Steve, are we making a change in that phraseology? I kid you not. And it finally happened, but by the time it happened, they had implemented safety management. And they said, well, now we've got to do a safety management assessment, whether or not we can actually change that sentence. They had a whole program for training and implementation and notifications and NOTAMs, because it was a big change. It did need to be done right. So I tell you that long story to say that, yes, change is constant in our system. And I think that what we want to do is we want to have the information on what's relevant for a particular area, region, national authority, airport, airspace, and then be able to engage the right stakeholders to ensure they're doing their part to roll that out in that part of the world. The guy sitting next to you he's death on the idea that we just can't quite seem to get radar operations to actually use radar in big parts of the world. And there's reasons for that. There's risk tolerance that's just not quite there in terms of people being afraid of taking on the risk of managing smaller separations in an environment where they maybe don't have the right training or procedures or comms. So safety is, or excuse me, I don't like to use that word. Risk management is something that we're going to have to get much better at to be able to implement these efficiencies and these capacities. My first trainer in the system told me, Steve, don't be in a hurry to answer the phone or issue a clearance. The safest airplane in the world is parked at the gate. So once that plane starts moving, risk starts to accumulate, you start to manage it. So that's not totally answering your question, except to say that there are different rates at which the standards need to be taken up in different environments. We need to have a better handle on how that's going so that states don't accidentally get dropped. No Country Left Behind is about helping the state actually manage their own risk well, and not necessarily about their EI. It's about knowing what their risks are and knowing that they've tackled them. Javier, anything you want to add? Okay. So I got another question. Here we go. We're 3 minutes to the ending, according to the green clock that I think turns red in some moment and comes and gets me.
I just would like to supplement on the last one, what Dan has asked. With my field experience of almost 20 over countries, in reality, in the Asia Pacific, we have EI starting from 5% until 99 to 100%. And when we have gone into those island states, it's not feasible. We thought over a period of time that whether we should put category A country, B country, and C country, just to help them, that C needs more help, probably. But the idea was not taken very well because we cannot again discriminate. But the support needed, if I talk about Samoa, an island state, just one guy looking after everything. He's ops, he's PEL, he's airworthiness, he's ANS, he's AGA. Now, putting over him 790 protocol question, what do you expect? Is one single major problem. Second problem we have seen in very many countries, out of 39, when we write a state letter, only 10, 15 replies. The reason being there is a missing link between the CA and the ministry. I mean, it's not really a CA problem. We from ICAO have never arranged a high-level meeting or high-level workshops with the ministry. It is the ministry who needs to understand, in those countries I'm talking about, if we demarcate them as category C country, and there we need to put in effort, writing a state letter up to the NCMC, going up to the DG does not solve the problem. Every time you ask them, their ministry did not publish the government order.
I'm looking for a question.
Yeah, so last but not the least, my suggestion is that probably if we could think about that for those states with the SARPs as we are going forward, that has to go forward, but we need to come up with a package where we can, with the low EI state, we can help differently, whether categorizing them in terms of EI or in terms of capacity building percentage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're going to check if there's, I had one other hand up. No? I have one other hand up. We're going to take your question, then we're going to answer. These guys are all going to get 1 minute each, and we're done. Okay? So I need a microphone in the middle with a gentleman with his hand up.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Zachary Nidamou. I'm a CNS engineer from Morocco. So my question for Mr. Henry, for AFCAC, I want to know the strategy of AFCAC for the countries in Africa that have limited resources and infrastructures. So I want to know if there is like a vision on long term and if like a direct vision.
Okay, thank you. So Henry, you get to start off. We're in summary, gentlemen. Any last points that you have? We're going to go one at a time, and Henry, you're first.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for bringing that question. And you're prompting me to think that maybe you have a leakage of what is happening currently. In coordination with the African Union Commission, it's a department at the AU that works very closely with AFCAC, and also collaborating with the regional offices. We are planning to conduct an infrastructure gap analysis for the continent. So this is something that will give us information. From the discussions we've been having here, you realize that we need data to make decisions. Without data, it becomes very difficult even to determine where you need to invest. So this is something, we are having a workshop in Morocco from the 27th to 30th, Casablanca. That's why I thought maybe from Morocco you have an idea. So this is something that we are getting experts, using the experts we have under the ANS working group. We'll also extend that to the AGA experts working group, together with other stakeholders like IATA, SCI, Council, and many others, ATNS in South Africa, and so many. They're coming on board. Then we'll chart the way forward, a roadmap, so that we give this information back to the Council of Ministers, and then they determine where do we need to invest more in terms of aviation infrastructure. So that is the approach we are having. It was interrupted by COVID. It's something that ought to have begun in 2019. Something started, but it was interrupted. It didn't mature. Otherwise, I think based on the general discussion, I just wish to emphasize that we realize that you cannot, they normally say, if you want to move faster, you move alone. But if you want to go far, you have to go with others. So in Africa, we've decided to move together. And that's why we are extending this to our international partners. We also realize that within the continent, we are not self-sufficient, we are not self-reliant. We depend on ICAO, we depend on many states. So please, if you are there and you didn't know how to partner with AFCAC, we are available. You can talk to the Director of Navigation Bureau, you can talk to me, talk to anyone. We have the contacts so that we see which areas can we partner in. There's capacity building, there's support for states, there's infrastructure, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henry. Fabio?
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for the moderation and the great presentation from all the panel members. And I think if there's a message that we could share here is get everything that's in ICAO provisions, the standards, and turn them into a meaningful element of discussion before implementation within your countries, within your organizations. We need a more critical analysis and assessment of what we're providing. Being able to do this before a standard comes out, that would be excellent. If it's in place, I think it's always subject to discussion and assessment. So Within that, do not use or consider the ICAO provisions as a mere checklist of things that you have to do, but actually something that you will evaluate and assess if they're useful or not for the reality that you face. Providing that feedback could be part of the improvement process that Steve mentioned, which is part of the process within the transformational objective of the organization. But if we do it by ourselves, really, we're just going to convince between us that this is work and this is great. So please be part of that transformation, that improvement, by having a critical analysis and giving us your thoughts on this throughout all the processes that we go through.
Thanks, Fabio. Javier?
Yes, so first, just to wrap also my presence here, because I will be leaving tomorrow morning, I want to take the opportunity also to express what a privilege it is to work with so many of you. We do have, it was referred earlier, projects in Africa, projects in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, in North Asia, and all places in the world. It is an absolute privilege to work towards and learn also from you through these projects. It is a great privilege to be here in Korea, a country that scores so high and has demonstrated such a good performance on precisely on the work that you do at ICAO. So here's a personal message. I hope my colleagues will endorse it as well. For those of you working at ICAO, I really wish you all the best to go back to express your opinions. Please remember that. Be European as much as you can. Have your discussions. All countries as well. Sometimes it's tough to state deficiencies. My years in Asia, I had colleagues mentioning that the reason why the country is not saying that is because they fear, and that is this spiral that perhaps is one to address. But again, have good discussions, be open, have opinions, and see how we can all make better. I take from SecGen good messages as well. I also take a call for support, put people in contact that can support states from which can all learn. And yeah, so keep the good work. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard 3 experts from 3 different regions tackling change on a daily basis and grappling with how to make sure that the implementation is done well, that they understand where the risks are, that the capacity building is done effectively. But what you heard more than anything is about collective action. Because with the change that's coming and the speed that it's coming, states can't stand alone. They have to be sharing with one another, and when they're doing it regionally, that's one method. Another method is through working in the ICAO process or in regional processes to learn lessons that are being drawn every day on the control room floor, on the flight deck, in the engineering bay, because the people who understand where the risks are those people that are working in those areas. We didn't touch much on the crucial importance of safety reporting, but the data that Fabio talked about, Javier talked about, that Henry's working with, that data only works if you have good information coming from people who are in the field. So just culture and voluntary reporting systems that reward transparency and lesson sharing is a vital part of making the system safe as we go through an accelerating pace of change. And I want to commend our partners in Korea who are part of the USO process, very integral part, because the back end of a lot of our software is actually done in partnership with the Ministry of Land and Infrastructure and Transport. And they have stood up because they see the value in making the expertise that they have here widely available through processes. And many of the other states in this part of the world who have strength and leadership are also doing the same thing. So collective action, that's the key. But managing risk means that we all have to accelerate the pace of sharing, not necessarily the pace of changing regs, because frankly, the change is coming whether we change regs or not. and understanding that risk together and sharing it through partnerships and relationships like you're making here today is the key to this system. Please join me in congratulating our hosts and our panelists, and thank you to our hosts again for facilitating this conversation.
Well, thank you very much. We were not only joined by the 3 experts, but we had the perfect moderator who led the session. So why don't we give the 4 of them another big round of applause.